Hey guys, I know I keep doing these vlog style videos. I'm still working on the new Lost Media Chronicles very slowly, but okay, I'll get straight to the point. I wanted to say a few things regarding the protests. I kind of been sitting on the topic for about a week now because I'm not really like I didn't want to make it sound like an ego stroke or like an attempt at self-promotion. And when you're a white guy saying anything about this, no matter what stance you take, you can be seen as trying to ride a bandwagon or whatever it is. But I need to say something. So before I get into exactly the title of this video, because that's probably going to be the thing that irks a lot of people, first off, I want to say that I do not support what the police are doing right now at all. I don't support with a lot of the unnecessary violence and brutality. And it's something that's been going on for decades, and people have been trying to talk about it for decades, and how black people are disproportionately affected by it. I'm kind of filming this raw, so I'm probably going to fumble a lot and maybe go on a few tangents. And I, as a white male that grew up on the military base, it took me quite a while to really understand exactly how massive the problem was. Because even when I did interact with police outside of the military base, when I finally moved out and as an adult, I mostly had pleasant experiences, and those are isolated. And again, it's because I'm white. I don't really suffer at the hands of the police like people of color do. So it took me quite a while to really grasp everything, and my views have evolved over the years. But this isn't about me. This is about the suffering that people of color have had at the hands of the police since forever. Let's face it, in this country. Even like after slavery was abolished, it was there, and even before slavery was abolished, it was there. And it has to stop. This is the next step towards true equal rights, to be completely honest. I support the protesters 100%. I support their anger. I support every single bit of I already said anger. I'm trying not to say that again. Just every single bit of anger that's being expressed by individuals of color. Because this is not acceptable. And our current presidential administration is supporting this 100%, supporting not the individuals of color, but the police. They're making it worse. Trump is making all of this worse. My heart goes out not just to George Floyd, who died unnecessarily at the hands of the police, but at the dozens, probably hundreds or even thousands of individuals who have seen injustice at the hands of the police. Not just those that were murdered, but the people that were treated unfairly and unnecessarily, just brutally, or even if it wasn't brutal, just even verbal beratement. We have to understand that we're not just protesting for the people that die. We're protesting against an entire system, And I hope that if and when, and I hope it's more of a when and not an if, that this all stops, that this all ends, that we can then focus on fixing the racism that is faced outside of police brutality. Because this isn't just a police brutality thing. The coronavirus affecting individuals of color more heavily than white people, that's a problem. Because they have bad access to medical care. White supremacists would like to say that it's because somehow white people are evolutionarily superior. Don't listen to those fuckers. That's not true. So, I want to, at least before I go into the main topic of this video, say that I know where I'm coming from and where I stand on this. And that I understand that as a white male, I am not a voice of authority in this movement, in the Black Lives Matter movement, in any of the protests. I also want to apologize ahead of time. My roommate is hungry and making food, and I have a really busy day ahead of me, and I don't really have any other times to be filming this. I'm just trying to get this done so that way I can focus on my day. So, yeah, I'm not in a position of authority because I've never faced police brutality at my own expense. Also, I have a bird. He's going to squawk a little bit here and there. Not much I can do about that. So, all right. Like I said, I have a tendency to go on a lot of tangents. So, to the topic of this video. I want to also preface this by saying I understand that a lot of the violence that is happening in the riots, and not all the riots are turning violent. Yes, I'm even going to use the word riot. The riots are completely justified, but the violent riots, the ones that lead to property damage, to injury, are mostly the fault of police and white supremacist organizations. I want to recognize that. It's because the police feel that it's necessary to raise those tensions. And by opening fire, by, yelling or striking someone, they're the ones that are turning these otherwise peaceful protests into unnecessary acts of brutality. Sunny. So, and then also there have been times where somebody who is suspected to be a police officer have been seen lighting fire to buildings or going in undercover and riling these crowds up. I say suspected because I don't really know how solid that is. I've heard some people dispute it. I'm not going to stand with the police on their side on this at all, but I also don't want to make false statements. But I've heard about that, and there's also been quite a few times where white supremacist organizations have riled up the crowds as well, or just lit buildings on fire, so that way they can make it look like it was the Black Lives Matter movement people that were doing that. But the bigger problem, I think, another big problem, I'm not going to say the bigger problem, I shouldn't have said that, but another big problem is people that, white men mostly, that, think that this is a chance to overthrow the fucking government, as if that's like the goal of these protests. Because I don't really think that was the goal of the Black Lives Matter movement or of these protests that were the result of George Floyd's, unnecessary murder. Not that murder is ever necessary. I completely, I'm just befuddled how there's so many young white males that are part of these protests that probably don't really care deep down about the Black Lives Matter movement, or they do, but they also have like their other ulterior motives behind them, that think that this is our opportunity to turn this country into anarchy, completely misunderstanding the whole anarcho-punk movement. And that's another thing. I know I put in the title white anarcho-punks, and I want to make this clear. I understand that not every single white male that identifies as an anarcho-punk that goes to these protests in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement are part of this problem. But a lot of them are. A lot of them are setting fire to buildings, a lot of which, like some of them are calculated, like, lighting, police buildings on fire. And that's understandable because that's who they're protesting against to begin with. But I've seen reports of small locally owned businesses owned by people of color, by other various minorities. My cousin talked about a gay bar in New Mexico that was set ablaze. There were rumors that allegedly the person there that ran the bar was a Trump supporter, but I found no evidence of that other than just hearsay from, Facebook posters. There have been a couple of local businesses here in Tucson that have been set ablaze that were owned by minorities, or that were windows shattered, even just minor little things like that. I act as if it's minor because a broken window is expensive to replace, and a lot of these businesses are struggling right now in the middle of a pandemic. Or even white-owned businesses that support Black Lives Matter, or never had a political stance to begin with. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I get that the idea that we're trying to amplify the suffering of people of color, but that doesn't mean that innocent people of any race should be suffering at the hands of rioters, which are mostly the people that are escalating this are white men. And what does the punk movement have to do with this? You'd be asking. Well, punk has been a massive part of underground society and a huge influencer on protesting movements for at least 20 years now. Of course, the truth is punk has been around for 50 years, but it's been a part of mainstream, I say underground culture as if that's even relevant anymore, but it's been part of relevant culture and a massive influence for at least 20 years, if not more. And there has been a problem within the punk movement of toxic masculinity. And I feel like I can talk about this because if you guys remember some of the videos I've been doing, I've been wanting to do like this music history series. And a lot of modern music history has been influenced by punk. And I've been reading a lot of books about punk. And let me tell you, the types of people that are taking advantage of this, setting buildings on fire, damaging people's property. And again, I don't want to ever emphasize that property is more serious than people's lives. Obviously, people's lives are way more valuable. But when, you're burning just a random car that you see on the street, that's a car that might be owned by a person of color who doesn't have the money to buy a new vehicle. And they might work halfway across town. And now you just ruined their mode of transportation. They might lose their job as a result of you burning that vehicle. I mean, there have been times where, again, these vehicles get burned and they're calculated because they know who owns those vehicles. So I get that some of these acts of looting and vandalism are calculated and are targeted, but not all of them are. And when you set any building on fire, you also put all the buildings surrounding it in that general vicinity at risk of being set ablaze too. Now, again, I don't want to say that property is more valuable than human lives, because it's not. But that toxic masculinity that the punk, community has been facing is now bleeding in to other things. And I get that this is a problem of toxic masculinity in general, but a lot of these people are part of that punk community. And I feel that the punk community needs to take it upon itself to call these individuals out. It shouldn't just be the people of color that see this happening that are calling them out. And another thing I'd like to point out is that the people glorifying the looting and the property damage, 90% of the people I've seen supporting that are white. I've seen a few people of color, support it, but and they're entitled to their opinion. But the white people that say that that's the purpose of the looting and the property damage, they need to realize that it's the fellow white people that are mostly doing that. And again, I don't want to ever make it sound like there aren't people of color that are doing it, because that's false, but it's mostly white men doing it. I've seen the footage of these protests taking place in several different American cities. And not taken just by the media. The media wants us to believe that it's the people of color that are doing this. Even CNN is showing disproportionately that it's people of color that are doing this, which is not true. CNN, Fox News, all of them are painting this image that it's the people of color that are doing this, and it's not. It's mostly those young, white, men that think that this is their chance to live out their fantasy of, government overthrow. And don't get me wrong, I want to see a reform in the government as much as anyone else. A massive overhaul. Not just a simple, tweaking of a few laws here and there. But massive overhaul in the way things are done and the way things are run. I want to see that. But the type of overthrow that these white men want to see is going to lead to a lot of suffering of minorities. And the Black Lives Matter movement does not support that. Right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I completely support people that need to go out and protest right now. Because, even after this virus is over, this is going to be an issue, and more people are going to suffer at the hands of police, especially if Trump remains in power. Especially if Trump remains in power. And it's just going to get worse. I get that there's going to be more people suffering than there will be people that die of the virus in the long run, and that's why people are choosing this time to protest. And just a few observations, just to support that the toxic masculinity in the punk scene's always been a problem, even since the beginning. There were dozens of bands that would wear Nazi uniforms to ruffle the feathers of, hypersensitive individuals. Just basically as a fuck you, I can wear what I want. And I get that that's part of what punk stands for, but there's like a line that should be drawn there. Individuals such as Henry Rollins, I'm going to point him out in particular, who beat the shit out of a lot of people that don't deserve it. Because, there's been a couple of people that Henry Rollins beat the shit out of that did deserve it because they were assholes. But, I've read, Our Band Could Be Your Life, I think was the name of the book. And I read a lot of those accounts of people that, saw Henry Rollins just fucking go at somebody for no fucking reason whatsoever. The dozens of white men that, white male musicians that, slept with underage girls, even back in the 70s and 80s, it was seen as wrong. I'm sorry, people like to say, oh, those were different times. No, they weren't. I've read dozens of accounts of frightened parents that saw their children leave with these adult rock stars, and they were panicked and terrified. I'm sorry, I don't think society, saw it any differently back then than they do now. So, like, individuals such as Iggy Pop, David Bowie, and Anthony Kiedis, and don't even get me started with the blood on the dance floor guy, that do these things and continue to have careers or continue to be worshipped despite the fact that they passed. Um, we need to hold those individuals accountable. Um, I know I had a lot more. Just the fact that, and I know that Death Grips isn't a punk band per se, but a lot of the people that listen to Death Grips that are part of that fan base, they have close ties to the punk community. The fact that the toxic fandom of Death Grips, are the types of people that are going out there and setting buildings on fire, like completely missing the point of the band's music to begin with. Just, there's a lot of things that lead to the type of mentality that, these men that think that they're so fucking woke, that think that they're so, above everyone else, and they pretend to be on the side of Black Lives Matter because they make it sound like they're fighting for the same thing, but they're not. And that's bullshit just needs to stop, guys. Like, if you see that type of behavior, I mean, it's not just the responsibility of the punk community to point these out. And I get that not all the white boys doing this are punks, but I feel like it is our duty to point out that these individuals are not helping. So, yeah, I'm about done with my, 30-minute rant. I'm not even sure how long I've been sitting here. I'm exhausted, reading about this type of shit. I want to see things change. I really do. We're all fucking exhausted. We're dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with the most important civil rights movement probably in our nation's history, probably more important than, the ones that took place in the 1960s. And this is going to lead to hopefully actual fucking change, but riling things up to further your ulterior motives, that's not helping.